Welcome to Lab 5, Part A, Exploration of Heat Capacity of Land and Sea. Heat capacity. If you've ever been swimming at the beach in June, then you know that while the temperature of the sand can be hot, the water can be surprisingly cold. These temperature differences exist even though the amount of incoming solar radiation is the same for both the local sand and the ocean. If you recall, specific heat capacity is the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of 1 gram of a substance by 1 degree Celsius. Thus, the main reason for the temperature difference between the sand and water is the high heat capacity of water. Water can absorb large amounts of heat with little change in temperature. To a lesser extent, reflection can cause differences in the amount of solar radiation thrown back from the surface. And absorption, the ability to distribute heat across a mass, can also affect the change. Sand distributes heat across a relatively thin layer, while the ocean distributes heat across a relatively thick surface layer called the mixed layer. We will discuss the mixed layer more later in this lab assignment. Thus, heat capacity is relative to the physical state of each material, and the transfer of heat is affected by 2 key properties: convection, where ocean waters allow for the rapid and effective downward transfer of absorbed heat, and conduction, where sand allows for the relatively ineffective transfer of heat from sand grain to sand grain, which greatly limits the downward transfer of absorbed heat. Next, you will compare the heat capacity of water and sand by measuring temperature changes in response to a similar heat source. During this experiment, make sure to record all temperature measurements in your lab table. Now, pause the video and watch Lab 5 Heat Capacity Experiment. Welcome back. Now that you've collected your data, plot the time versus temperature data using either the indicated symbols or your own color scheme. Then, using your plotted data points, answer your lab questions as they relate to the patterns of temperature change. When answering your lab questions, make sure to address temperature changes that resulted from changes in the light source, heat capacity as it relates to water and sand, either high or low, and the speed of relative temperature changes, slower or faster, as they specifically related to warm-up and the cool-down periods. This experiment directly expressed the difference in heat capacity between sand and water. The heat capacity of sand is approximately 0.18 calorie per gram degree Celsius, while the heat capacity of water is more than 5 times higher at approximately 1.004 calories per gram degree Celsius. Under the same heat source, sand needed less heat to increase in temperature because of its lower heat capacity, and water needed more heat to increase its temperature because of its higher heat capacity. Heat adjustments. Additionally, when heat sources were adjusted to stimulate equatorial and polar regional temperatures, temperature measurements reflected a change in heat accordingly. When answering your lab questions, make sure to specifically address how temperature changes related to heat capacity and how adjustments in heat sources affected the speed of change. It's now time to complete your lab assignment for Part A, Exploration of Heat Capacity. Then watch Video 3, Part B, Exploration of Global Ocean Temperatures. Please address your questions to your lab TA.